Okay, we are looking at creating fields. There are two groups. I would call them the easy or plain or common field types, which we will be looking at first. There are also advanced field types, which primarily is your custom field types, which we will only look at after we have covered the admin views and how you connect fields to views. It's quite important because those custom field types really only make sense if you see the relationships between views and fields, and if you have already have that knowledge well acquainted and able to handle. Okay, so we'll first look at the more common field types. Not all of them, of course. I'm just going to illustrate to you the text field type and the list field type. Uh, and all the others sort of follow the same kind of implementation. So let's create a new field type. We would select text as our first illustration, and it'll automatically load the fields here set on the field types default settings we looked at previously. When it comes to this information here, you need to have a well formulated background, or formulated is not the right word there, well, a good background on MySQL to understand exactly what is a varchar, what is a text, what is a medium text, long text. These are basically the data type in relation to the database. Now I've added the feature of you being able to change that because I want to liberate your ability to develop applications that are more advanced than a cookie cutter kind of component builder. So this component builder really wants to leave enough room for you to make very advanced choices. And the more I constrain it to a sort of just click here, there, don't know any code, just go on and build something, the more I am going to frustrate the real developer who is wanting to design something more advanced and more versatile. And so I didn't choose that option. There are component builders out there that most possibly have done that, but I don't want to. I want to give you enough tools to really be creative, and so that means a little bit more complexity all over because of that. But if you know PHP and you have worked with PHP in relation to SQL or any other SQL database connections via Java or any other language, you will know that there is such a thing as a data type, and it has a length, and you can set some default value to it, and you can decide whether it's a key or a unique key. Just realize if you set it as a unique key, as an index type, then that means that specific field will only allow a value once, and if that same value is placed in it, it will shout at you and it will be an error. So you hardly ever use that. Not even for an alias will you use that, because the alias implementation in Joomla deals with the duplication within the model. When it saves the information, it actually checks whether there is an alias in the database and increments the alias so that it doesn't conflict. So even there, you do not even need that feature, but it is available and you might see a need to use it, so I added it there that you can choose it. And then your normal null switch, whether the table should be null if it's empty. Usually you would use one of these default values and then set it not null. Okay, and then the storing method, you will most of the time use default. This being because these other methods require much more knowledge of what you are trying to achieve. And if you do have that knowledge, then I could say that JSON will mostly be used when you are storing an array of items to the database. And yet, when you are using list, which we'll look at just now, you wouldn't need to use JSON because Joomla's implementation of the list field type deals with arrays already. Unless you are using, sorry, I'm not saying that correctly. If the list allows for multiple selection, then you need to use JSON. But as far as I can remember, I think let me just check here to be sure. I'm in the code, and here is the place where we sort of deal with, how are we going to store the data, or we basically tripping the switches for it. And let me just look down here. Okay, so if the field type is checkboxes, it will go in here and it will add it as a JSON object. If there is multiple selected, it will add it as a JSON object. If the type name is tag, so if you're using the tag field type, it will not go in here no matter what you do. Let me see the store. If it's not 0, which is default, then it will fall back onto this. Now, if it is checkbox and you haven't selected one of those features, for example, if you haven't selected one of these, JSON or base 64, and it is a checkbox field type, then it will fall back to, let me just see, to JSON. So that's the default switch. So in the switch it checks with what you've set. If you set it to JSON, it will use JSON. If you set it to base, it will use base. If you've done an encryption, it will use that. But if you set none and it is a checkbox, it will set it to JSON. So even if you set the checkbox to default, we are still going to make sure it's saved as a JSON, because Joomla doesn't deal with checkboxes correctly. In fact, it tells you that as a warning on their pages. So the component builder knows that, and so I know that, and so I coded it in so that it will anyway make sure that we're storing a JSON object and not just the array itself. And so this is just looking at the checkboxes and other JSON items for the view. And so for most things that we are looking at the UI, if we are not sure how the implementation works, looking at the code is the quickest way to actually understand what would be the way to select. And now that means if you're not a PHP developer and you cannot figure out where this line or that particular area of code is being addressed, then obviously this is to your own disadvantage. But if you're able to read PHP, then the compiler itself leaves in the XML files and in other files that you are building. Wait, I'm way offline here. In other models or things that it's building, it is showing you in which file it is actually building this part of the script and exactly on what line. So that is the way for you to get in there and see exactly what is being done, and that will also help you to determine what you need to change for it to possibly work if it isn't working. Now there is no way for me to avoid this, and the reason why there is no way to avoid Joomla by Joomla themselves. Okay, so going back to just a normal text field, we would just leave it to default. These other options of encryption we will explain in a later video, and possibly you will not ever use these. I had the need for them in a component that I had to develop, and so I added those features in, and at this stage it's really quite difficult to implement if you do not have many. Well, let me put it this way: the basic one, which is actually more secure if you would ask certain people, is easy to implement. But the advanced one, which is for other purposes than just your normal encryption, is a little bit more advanced and difficult to implement. So for now, if you're not that advanced in your programming skills, then you should just avoid these. This base64 is often used when you're storing code into the database. Most of component builders areas where you can add custom scripting is using this base64 as the storing method. Okay, so now here, if we're going to create an email field, and I'm going to say that it should not be required, I'm going to change this to 255 and leave this to default. I'm going to change that to email. Oh wait, this is the name. So names we usually don't do uppercase. And then that's what's going to be used for the database, right? So this field all over the system and in all the code is going to be called by that name. Email underscore lowercase email. Then here the name, the label, is what will be visually seen in the form. So there we'll be adding enter email. We'll leave the text size the same, max length is good. I'm not going to use the default field, and it is, if I, let's see, default is optional, so I can just leave it out. Description, I'm going to say and enter email. Okay, I'm going to remove those. I'm going to leave required to false to ensure that it isn't required, and then I'm going to use validate email, and I'm not going to use the field option. Field option is to validate against another field that they both equal each other. We don't need that for this field. And here I'm going to place demo. Come on. And I'm going to leave those out. So there we have an email field. Now this validate option, there are some custom validating options in Joomla. Email is one of them. Then there is a way to create your own validation, and the way to implement that would be to write the PHP up for that. So you'd need to know, what's needed to write your own validation, and to place it via the custom adding in of files, to place it in the correct location where the Joomla form builder will be able to get that field validation type and add it into your field. So if you know what I'm talking about, then you will know where to place it, and you'll later see that in the component itself it has an option to add custom files and how to map it to the correct location. Then you can use your own validation type there to extend on the validation options. But currently Component Builder itself doesn't do extra custom validating options. It only uses Joomla's defaults. Now that means you can also leave it out and then it doesn't do validation, but it still will do filtering. And here is a list of the available filters that Joomla has. Okay, so that's to create an email field, that is a text field. You can target these text fields with CSS and JavaScript respectively in the list and in the single view. The views plural is the list view, view single is the single view or the edit view in the back end, and both of these are is targeting the editing view and the list view in relation to its back-end display. If you extend the editing view to the front, then it will also load the JavaScript to the front. But you cannot extend the list view to the front. You need to build a custom front, which we will eventually get to, which is called site views. Okay, so this is primarily targeting your admin area with these scripts. Although, like I said, you can extend the editing one, which is this view, the single view, to the front, which means it will also extend that to the front. The way to target it, this field, would be that is the ID plus JForm. So if you forget that, you can look at any other field, and you'd see it says JForm underscore and then the field name. See there as the ID. Just using Firebug to do that. And so that means you can just in front of this email, I see I had a typo there. Just in front of that email, you just put, not in here though, but if you want to target it in your JavaScript or in your CSS, so let me show you. So you would add it there and say JForm underscore, and now you can target it with CSS, maybe color or something. There we go. Well, that's going to make it invisible, but you can target it anyway. Let's make it black then. There we go. And the JavaScript in the same way, if you use jQuery, you would add JForm underscore in front of the form name, the field name, sorry. And the nice thing about this is that you can add this script to the field, and in any view where you use this field, this script will follow it. It will go along with it. So it will be added to that view dynamically. You don't need to rewrite it everywhere. So as soon as you're working, for example, I have a script, let me show you, that I'm using for numbers. That will be nice to show you. Hold on a moment. Okay, I found even a better option to demonstrate. I had to create a repeatable field, which we'll look at later as an advanced field. But inside of that repeatable field, I wanted to add a date field. Now, those of you that work with Joomla will know that you can currently not add a date field to a repeatable field. So what we did, and this is gonna possibly be very impressive, but let me show you. I simply used a text field and I added that to it. Now, as you can see here, we have PHP right in this JavaScript block. And the way to add PHP here is you would do the open brackets question mark PHP, and then again question mark close. There is an PHP, and we are adding the jQuery framework. Now, this script I added to the repeated fields script area, not to the actual text field. And the reason why I didn't add it to the actual text field is because the text field is obviously going to be repeated, right? So you're going to have 10, 20, whatever text, that specific text field. But with this code, I'm able to target up to 50 repeats of that field, right? With that saying, okay, the field number, we set at least 50, allow, then this JavaScript area is being repeated 50 times and incremented incrementally. And so the course date field, date, again, this ID I got from after creating the repeated field. I went in and looked at the ID of that field, added a date picker, and I set the value of that date picker and basically added to the field, and it works very well. So this custom scripting area for JavaScript can also take PHP inside of it and JavaScript that will be then added to the view in which this field is going to be used. And I think it's very nice feature that we have, and it's very useful. It's come in very useful for myself anyway. Okay, so we're not going to do that. We just want to use it for creating a simple email field. And so we'll just click save, or save and close, or save and new. So that's looking at creating a text field type. Now let's quickly do a list field. Sorry, not view. So we click on list, and we see that it has an option array or string here. Now the options are set with a 0 and a pipe, and then a name and a comma. Now that basically represents one item in the drop down. So if you see this drop down here, then that is one item, that is an item, that is an item. Okay, so each of those would basically be represented between the commas. The pipe makes a separation between the value being stored in the database and the value being shown to the person accessing the form. Now if that value is the same value, so if you want to store in the database the same value as the one that is being displayed, then you simply drop off the pipe with the initial values like that. So it will say option 1, 2, and then that should be 3, right? Option 3. Now that is another allowed way to use it. Or you could say, I want one option to be viewed as having not selected anything yet. So if you wanted to say option 1, okay, I want to add another option, you would say please select an option, comma. By adding we can leave the please because it's getting too long here. So just select an option. By adding the pipe without a value, it's being treated as a null. So when the form, when the drop down is built, then it will be like nothing is selected. It's basically that option. See, select an option. It's exactly what I did here. Although this is a custom field, this type field. I don't have one of those here. Sorry. But just that you know, that will basically behave the same as that one. Okay, and then the other values would be selecting and have you can use it as IDs or even a total different value like that. It doesn't matter. Just know that it possibly would make everything lowercase, which if you put it that side of the pipe. Now this could be left out, and you can fill in these information based on your requirements. So that's how you set up a list field. I hope that shows you what is possible. But as you can see, this list field isn't dynamic in the way that a custom field possibly can be. You see the list field here, you statically set a few values that is unchanging and which should be selected. But with the custom field type, which we'll look at in a later video, you can have another table's values populate the list for you. So as it's being created, your list gets longer dynamically, and we'll still look at that, and that is obviously available. But this is a more static, set it once and use it over and over, whereas there is actually also a dynamic list option, which I will illustrate later. Well, that is creating a list view. Let's quickly also look at a radio button, which is very similar. If you were to creating a radio button, there is though one point to make here. If you create a radio button, you'd see that there are only two values, and you can add more than two to the list, but I always think of it this way: as soon as it becomes a list of values, then use a list. A radio button should at most have 3 selections, or maybe at most 4, and it really depends on the length of the text. So if it's yes, no, and maybe, and no thank you, or yes, no, maybe, or not yet decided, so that's 4 options. Okay, so that could be okay, but as soon as it gets a 5th value, possibly you should look at a list instead. Again, with the radio button, you can just leave it at uh, the default storing method, and again, the field attributes are very similar to the text attributes, except for this options array option here. Then also, like the list field type, it is separated by a comma, and the store value and the display value is separated by a pipe. Now, it is important to note that you cannot use these exclamation marks inside sorry, not exclamation, quotation marks inside of your values. If you want to use quotations inside, you need to look up the HTML equivalent of that quotation marks and use that, and then it will work. But if you add a quotation inside here, it will literally break off the string right there, and you'll have only one value show up. So that's just that you know. Okay, so that is a radio button. Let's look at another one quickly. Color is quite straightforward. It has a default value. You need to remember to set the label and the name. Always the type must not be changed, and if you select color here and you do change the type, you realize that the component builder will simply ignore what you did here and will fall back to that. It will not, because it is a field which, when we set up the field type, the type itself was set to being mandatory and unchanging, remember, and that's why you cannot override it. Everything that you've set to mandatory and unchanging will fall back to the setting that you set there in the field type, and then even if you change it here, it will not change. Okay, then there is the description, and if it's required, and show on. Again, the show on feature is something that is very nice, and as we go, we'll get to see it in action. But you can have a field like, for example, a list field, which has an ID 2, which should be selected so that this color field should show. So you could say, let's say the list field's name is access, or what would be now ideal? Let's say view. So view, and then 1 would be, if in the view field the option with the value of 1 is selected, then will this field only show up. Now you can have it if 1 or 4 is selected, then it will show up. And this implementation is your Joomla default implementation of the show on field. Unfortunately, it cannot target multiple other fields yet, as far as I know, and that's why we have in Component Builder our own implementation, which is far more advanced and which we'll look at once we get to views. Okay, so that's just looking at color, and let's see, another one that's quite interesting is category, I suppose. In category you have extension, and this extension, if you read it, is the name of the extension for which the category will be retrieved. For example, to list content categories, use the value com content. You can add also target one view, use the value com underscore component dot view. What that means is that you can, just by adding the category field to a view, you automatically add a category to your component. So it will, you don't need to map the category at all. In fact, you cannot map it even if you wanted to. Joomla already has a category component in place, and if you add a category, well, this category type field which we are looking at now, obviously you can add your own category view and then use a custom field to link its values to other views. But if you are going to use Joomla's category implementation that integrates with your component, then this is the way you do it, and then you don't write anything for the category area. The Joomla does that itself and adds it to your component dynamically. And the only thing you need to do is actually an extension add your component's name. Now, we haven't looked at your component's name, and that in fact, I think we'll possibly come back to category when we have come to, you know, that area of sermon distributor where we adding categories to certain views. But that, you know, the categories can also be targeting just a specific view instead of the whole component itself. So it can only be related even to just one specific view, which makes it nice. That means you can have a category for list views, you can have a category for that, you can have a category, you can have multiple categories in one component. This is maybe an overkill, but it's nonetheless possible. And the way you do that is simply your component name and the specific view's name. And obviously the view must be in singular. You cannot target a list view, it must be a editable single view. So it is only saying view. Okay, so that's looking at category. We'll look at category again in a later stage where we actually will implement it. Editor is also a very common field which we're often using, and the editor is what in your Joomla content article manager is that big block in which your articles are placed. So here you can add such a block to your component, and there are some important things like the buttons, and if you read the description we have here, it explains to you how it works, and including the hide option and what kind of editor you want to load. Obviously your preferable one and the alternative one, desired or alternative, and the button option here is really, like I said, you can read it hides buttons based on what you've selected. And then you have a filter option here, and required basically again your normal attributes as with other field types in Joomla, since most of them are extending your base field in Joomla. Then the type and name and label and default and these things are also available to all the others. So that's quickly the editor. Let's see, media, just make sure with media that you select the correct directory. If none is set, I think it falls back to images, but you can target a specific directory inside of images, and I can see there it's mandatory, so you need to set it, and you can only target images itself, which is a limitation from Joomla side. So that directory starts at images, right? So it says the attribute should be relative to the top level images folder. So that means, let's say you want to target a specific folder inside images called foo, then you would add that there like that. And then preview, if an image has been selected, do you want the image to be able to be previewed by hovering over the side of the field, and you just change that to true if you want to. Again, the show on feature is here, and the other default concepts that we've already discussed. The another one that's nice is notes. Notes is basically above a field, or like here, if we said this is a note that you're seeing here, and so you can add notes around your fields, and it has very nice implementation right over there that you can read through. And yeah, I think that would be all for us looking at field types. Well, basically looking at the basic field types or common field types. If there is any other field types that you felt you need help with, then please look up the Joomla documentation, since the implementation is more or less straightforward, trying to not redesign the wheel. We're simply trying to implement Joomla's way of doing it. And so if there's a field type you need more information on, you can simply go look at Joomla's documentation on that field type. And if they don't have documentation, then you can go into the field. Like I said, libraries. There are 3 places to look: CMS, Joomla, and Legacy in the libraries folder is the places where these fields are found. So if you look under the CMS folder, you get the CAPTCHA field type, Chrome style, the content, the editor. So there's the editor. So if you want to know if there's more attributes that can be used in the editor, you can open the editor and look through the code and see the attributes that are being implemented across the board. So here it says set height, width, asset value, author field set, so it goes on. And if you see that there is a attribute that we are not already targeting, you can, like I have explained, go to the field type, open it, add the attribute, add the name, add the value, set whether it's mandatory. Obviously, I think if we left it out, it's not mandatory. And whether it's translatable. Translatable is an important concept, which not all fields are translatable. And when a field is translatable, Component Builder basically translate it for you. So if you look at let's use this acronym for example, you see I added there the label as acronym. Then while Component Builder builds this field into your component, it takes that value and it converts it into a translatable string, which it adds to the language file, and it adds that in here so that if somebody updates the language file, it updates everywhere in the system, which is basically means that languages are implemented everywhere in Component Builder's components. All the components it's building, it translates label, well, everything that you set to be translatable. So if we look at let's go look at a certain field type like text. Any property that you've said is translatable, like here the label is yes and the description is yes, and that seems to be it. Right, hint is also translatable, it's also set to yes. Means that Joomla will Component Builder will dynamically take hint and translate it into a language string, add it to your language file, and replace the XML with the language string like it's done here. See? So that is how you can extend existing field types and create fields with them. I hope that is good enough for you to get your hands into or to get excited about it and to use it. Obviously, having fields might still feel very primitive. And so next up we'll be looking at adding those fields to views and basically building your view itself. Okay, thank you for watching.